Hello everyone and welcome to the Pathfinder Lair. My name is Drew and I've been a game master of the Pathfinder system for years. On this channel I help new players understand the rules of the Pathfinder 2 system. Today in the Lair I will be covering the Pathfinder 2nd Edition character sheet generally and what to expect when filling it out, as well as some of the terminology that I talk about in other videos. I realized that I said I was going to do the gnome video next. However, I realized that some of you might not understand some of the terminology I talk about in those videos. So I'm doing this video instead. But don't worry, the gnome video is coming. It's just I have to do a couple other videos first. This is a dice rolling game. To play this game, you will need a set of polyhedral dice. You can get these dice at any gaming store or online if you prefer. Each time you want to do something in the game other than move around the battlefield, you will have to roll some kind of dice, probably. The numbers on your character sheet will apply to one or more of these dice rolls, depending on the situation that your character finds him or herself in when playing the game. I will talk about how these dice are used later on in this video. I will now cover each section of the character sheets. First up, let's talk about the ancestry of your character. An ancestry is your character's race, or a group of people that your character belongs to. Examples include, but are not limited to, the nimble elf, the gruff dwarf, and the brutish orc. Each of these ancestries has advantages and disadvantages. It's up to you to decide what ancestry your character is. I will cover more on that in each of my ancestry videos. Now let's talk about the background section of the character sheet. This is where you would put what job your character had before she decided to take an adventuring class. Maybe your character was a farmer. Maybe he or she was a tinkerer. Or maybe even a bounty hunter. Each background gives you ability score increases, as well as 2 specific skills and a specific skill feat. I'll cover more on backgrounds when I get to my general class and backgrounds video. Next we have the class section of the character sheets. A class is essentially an adventuring job and determines what your character is good at. Are you the angry barbarian? Are you the calm and collected wizard? Or are you a cleric with a deity? Completely your choice. Each class has advantages and disadvantages, just like ancestries. I'll cover more on those in my class videos. Next up, we have size. Your size is a generalization about how big your character is. Let's say your character is a gnome. Gnomes are small creatures, so they're about half the size of a human. Elves, on the other hand, are about the same size as humans, so they get medium status. Size really doesn't have any advantages or disadvantages in this system. It's just a generalization about how big your character is. Your alignment is a generalization of what your character's moral standards are. For example, there are 3 different types of good alignments. They are chaotic good, lawful good, and neutral good. Chaotic good generally means that you will do just about anything for the greater good. You don't really have a code of conduct, so if you think it's right, you're going to do it. Lawful good, on the other hand, has a code of conduct. They won't do certain things even if it is for the greater good, because it's against their code of conduct. Neutral good is somewhere between these two. This is what most people in real life are, is neutral good. Now, there are other alignments as well. They are, for example, you could be an evil character instead of a good character. It really depends on your preference. The traits section is where you would put any traits that your character has, such as the elf trait or the humanoid trait. Traits are keywords that convey some rules elements. For example, if you have the elf trait, then certain effects might affect you differently than if you had a different trait. Some things might not affect you at all because you have this trait. Others might have a greater effect on you because you have this trait. It depends on the trait, but this is where you would put that type of thing. Next up, we have the deity section. This section only really applies if you're playing a cleric or a champion. Those classes need a deity because that's where their powers come from. If you're not playing these classes, you can ignore this section. However, maybe your backstory involves a certain deity that you worship. In that case, you may want to fill out this section. Examples of deities include Pharasma, the deity of the dead, and Desna, the deity of art and beauty. Now let's talk about your character's level. This is a representation of how powerful your character is. You gain greater levels by either gaining enough experience points to level up through role-playing or defeating monsters, or by reaching a certain point in the story of the game based on what your game master or GM wants to do. Most characters start at first level, but your GM may decide to bring you in at a higher level, especially if you're coming in midway through the game, because that does happen. Players leave, so you have to find someone to replace them. Yeah, and it wouldn't be fair to start you off at the same at first level when the rest of the party is level 3. Below that on your character sheet is where you put your hero points. Hero points are a measure of your character's ability to do amazing things. You get 1 hero point automatically per session of the game, and you can get more of them by doing heroic things, like having your character face a really tough enemy on his own and beating it, or saving someone from certain doom while facing such doom and surviving. But you can only have 3 hero points at a time. Now, You can use those hero points to do one of two things. You can spend one hero point to reroll any one 20-sided die roll, otherwise known as a d20 roll. The second thing you can do with hero points is spend all of them that you have accumulated in order to stabilize while you have the dying condition. In other words, if you are unconscious and bleeding out, you can spend all of your hero points to stop the bleeding. You're still unconscious, but you're out of danger of dying unless an enemy decides to attack you while you're unconscious. However, your GM would have to be a complete jerk to do that to you. Almost all enemies are going to focus on the other players because that just makes sense. If you're fighting a group of people and one of them goes down, are you gonna go and make sure that person is dead, or are you going to fight the other enemies? I think it's pretty obvious which one you're going to do. Next up, we have the proficiency bonus. This is hugely important because this will apply to just about everything your character can do in one way or another. There are 5 different levels of proficiency: untrained, trained, expert, master, and legendary. Each of these proficiency levels determines how skillful you are in whatever they apply to. For example, if you are untrained in the medicine skill, then you aren't very good at all when it comes to bandaging people up or treating their wounds. However, if you are legendary in medicine, then you are essentially a surgeon or a hospital doctor. You're that good at treating people's wounds. As you can see on my screen, if you are untrained in a skill or ability, you get a 0 proficiency bonus to that skill. But if you're legendary, then you get 8 plus your level to that ability. It's very hard for you to fail if you're legendary in something. Next to that on the character sheet, we have the action economy when playing this game. You get 3 actions on your turn. If you're looking in the book and the ability you want to use has the first symbol next to it, that means that takes one of your 3 actions that you get every turn to use. This usually applies to striding, which is moving around the battlefield, stepping, which is only moving 5 feet, which is usually used to avoid reactions from enemies, or striking, which is attacking with a weapon in your hand. Now, the second symbol on your character sheet in this section is what is used for a 2-action activity. This means that you have to spend 2 of your 3 actions in order to use this ability. This usually applies to spells. Most spells fall into this category. There are also certain other abilities that require 2 actions as well. The third symbol on your character sheet in this section is for 3 action activities. These are very few and far between. A few spells and abilities fall into this category, but you're probably not going to have to worry about this section or this symbol too much, if at all. The next symbol on the list is for the free action. These are activities that take no time at all, such as dropping an item. These do not count towards your 3 actions that you get on your turn. That's why they're called free actions. Lastly, we have the reaction symbol. If this symbol is next to an ability, it is considered a reaction. A reaction is very similar to a free action, except that you only get 1 of these per round, and you can only use them in response to certain situations. Most of the time, it's when a foe does something. For example, to use the Glimpse of Redemption reaction from the champion, a foe must hit an ally, and that ally and the foe must be within 15 feet of you. Now let's move on to ability scores. These are a measure of your character's basic attributes. There are 6 of them: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Let's start with the physical ability scores. Strength is a measure of your character's, strength. How strong are they? What's their physical might? Next we have dexterity. Dexterity is a measure of your character's agility. How easily can they dodge out of the way of something? Next we have constitution. Constitution is a measure of your character's physical health and vigor. Now let's move on with the other 3 ability scores called mental ability scores, starting with intelligence. Intelligence is book smarts. How well can your character understand what he or she has read? How well can he or she decipher written codes? That sort of thing. Wisdom, on the other hand, is street smarts. How well can your character evaluate a situation? How insightful is he or she? That sort of thing. Lastly, we have charisma. Charisma is a measure of your character's force of personality or persuasiveness. Each of these ability scores has another number that's tied to it called a modifier. This will be a number between -1 and 7, depending on what your ability scores are. This is the number you will be using the most out of these 2 numbers. I'll cover more on these modifiers when I get to my more detailed character creation video. For now, all you need to know is that one of these modifiers will apply to just about everything your character can do, in one way or another. Now let's talk about class DC. DC stands for difficulty class. This is a measure of how hard it is to do or resist something. Class DC refers to how difficult it is to resist what your character does. For example, class DC might refer to how hard it is to dodge out of the way of the splash damage from an alchemist's bomb. Class DC is equal to your key ability score, a key ability modifier, I should say, sorry, which will depend on your class, and your proficiency bonus, plus 10, plus any item bonuses you have toward your class DC. Now let's talk about speed. Your character's speed is a measure of how far your character can move in the time it takes to use a single action. This usually refers to land speed, meaning how far can your character run in that time. However, your character may have abilities that let it use other types of movement, such as flying or burrowing. The same rules apply, it's just you're using a different speed than normal. Now let's talk about weapon strikes, starting with melee strikes. These are strikes with melee weapons, such as swords and axes. For accuracy, it's your strength modifier, plus your proficiency bonus, plus any magical enhancement that the weapon has. For damage, it's your weapon's damage dice, which will depend on the weapon, plus your strength modifier. There are 3 types of damage that melee weapons can do: bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. Some enemies will be resistant to one or more of these, so you may want to consider having multiple different types of weapons. This is also where you'll put any traits that the weapon has. I'll cover more on these when I get to my equipment video. Next we have ranged strikes. These are very similar to melee strikes, except that you are using a ranged weapon, such as a bow or sling. For accuracy with ranged strikes, it's your dexterity modifier plus your proficiency bonus, plus any magical enhancements that the weapon has. For your damage, it's just your damage dice, which will again depend on the weapon. Ranged strikes can also do bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. You also want to put any traits that your ranged weapon has in this section as well. The weapon proficiency section is a good place to put down what proficiency level you are in each type of weapon. There are 3 different categories of weapons: simple, martial, and advanced. All classes are at least trained in simple weapons. Some classes are trained in martial weapons. You normally have to either be high level or take a feat to use advanced weapons. The languages section is where you put all the languages that your character knows how to speak. Most characters start off with Common, which is essentially English, and their racial language, which could include Dwarven for dwarves and Elven for elves. Most characters also get their intelligence modifier to the number of languages they know how to speak. I'll cover more on modifiers when I get to my more detailed character creation video. Now we need to talk about the skills section. Skills are abilities that anyone in real life could use. For example, the athletic skill lets you do things like break down doors and climb ropes. The acrobatic skill lets you do things like squeeze through tight holes or balance on uneven surfaces. That kind of thing. There are many, many others, but I will cover all of them when I get to my skills video. Perception is a special skill. All classes are at least trained in it. This determines how well your character can perceive the things around him. How well can they hear? What's their eyesight like? 20/20 or worse? Really depends on what your wisdom modifier is and what your class is. Because some classes are better at perceiving things than others. Now let's talk about saving throws. Whenever your character is subject to a dangerous effect that must be avoided, your character gets to roll a saving throw. There are 3 types of saving throws. The first is called a fortitude saving throw. This is used to resist diseases, poisons, and physical effects. Your fortitude save is based on your constitution modifier plus your proficiency bonus. The second is called a reflex saving throw. This is generally used to avoid area of effect spells that deal damage, but this can be used against any effect in which you could dodge out of the way to avoid it. Lastly, we have the will saving throw. Will saving throws are used to avoid mental effects, like if an opponent tries to take control of you with a spell, or tries to confuse you, that sort of thing. Your character's armor class, or AC, is a measure of how hard it is to hit your character with certain abilities, such as strikes and spells that require an attack roll. This is equal to 10 plus your dex, plus your proficiency bonus, plus any item bonus that your armor gives you. You can also wear a shield to increase your armor class. I'll talk more about armor and shields when I get to my equipment video. Last thing on the first page of the character sheet I need to talk about is hit points, otherwise known as HP. This is a measure of how much damage your character can take before falling unconscious. This is determined at first level. You get your ancestry hit points, your class hit points, and your constitution modifier. At later levels, you just get your class hit points and your constitution modifier. You only get those ancestry hit points once. This does give you a bit more survivability at first level, but it does taper off because, like I said, you only get those ancestry hit points once. The second page is all about feats and other abilities, as well as inventory. Let's get started with feats. There are 4 different types of feats in this game: Ancestry, Skill, General, and Class. Ancestry feats are abilities that you can use because you belong to a certain group of people. For example, if you're an elf, you can use these feats. Or you're a dwarf, you can use these feats. I'll cover more on those in my ancestry videos. Skill feats expand on what your character can do with skills. For example, if you have the battle medicine feat, then you can use the medicine skill during combat, but only once per combat. Another example is the intimidating glare feat, which means that you can intimidate people even if they don't understand your language. I'll cover more on these when I get to my skill feats video. General feats are feats that any character can take as long as they meet the prerequisites. Examples include Fleet, which makes your character faster, and Untrained Improvisation, which makes your character better at his untrained skills. Next up, we have class feats. These are feats that your character can take because they are a member of a certain class. Examples include Sudden Charge, which enables your character to stride twice and make an attack roll with a melee weapon for 2 actions, and Divine Health, which makes your character resistant to disease. Also on this page is the inventory section. This is where you would put all the items that your character is carrying, including armor, weapons, gold, and other items. Every item has a certain amount of bulk that it takes up. If you go over your encumbered limit, then you have the encumbered condition. This limit is 5 plus your strength modifier. I'll cover the encumbered condition when I get to my conditions video. There's also a maximum limit. This is the most your character can carry. If you carry any more than this number, then your character cannot move or do anything because he's carrying too much. This limit is 10 plus your strength modifier. This is a limiting factor. Otherwise, everybody would carry everything they own on them. In real life, can you carry everything you own? No, I don't think so. You have a limit to what you can carry, and so does your character. I don't really use the third page when I build my characters, but you can. This is where you would put your character's backstory, your character's picture if you want to draw one, their personality, their age, all that role-playing stuff, plus any campaign notes you want to take. Most of the final page of the character sheet will only apply to you if you are playing a spellcaster, like a cleric, druid, or sorcerer. There are 2 types of spellcasters: prepared and spontaneous. Prepared spellcasters must, at the beginning of each day, decide which spells they are going to use for that day out of an entire list. The trade-off for that is they get more versatility than the other type of spellcaster, which is spontaneous spellcasters. These spellcasters have a certain set of spells that they know how to cast, and they can cast those spells in any combination during the day, as long as they have the spell slots. Spell slots refer to how many spells your character can cast per day. There's also a special type of spell called a cantrip. Cantrips are very simple spells. So simple, in fact, that you can cast them as many times as you want per day, as long as you either know them or you have them prepared, depending on which type of spellcaster you are. Next, there are 4 different types of magic traditions: arcane, divine, occult, and primal. Each of these has its own list and applies to a different type of spellcaster. I will cover more on this when I get to my classes videos. Moving on, how do spells work? Well, it depends on the spell. Some spells require you to make an attack roll. In that case, you will use your spell attack roll. This is equal to your key ability modifier, which will be given in my class videos, plus your proficiency bonus. You would roll a d20 and add your spell attack roll. And if you beat their AC, you hit. Other spells require the foe to make a saving throw, which I covered earlier in this video. For this, you would use your spell save DC. This is equal to 10 plus your key ability modifier plus your proficiency bonus. The foe would roll their saving throw, and then you would compare that number to your spell save DC. Your GM will determine what happens next. Before I wrap up this video, I want to talk about the different types of dice in this game, because it's more than just a 6-sided dice. What I have on screen is the 20-sided dice, also known as a D20. This is the most important dice of them all. You will use this one constantly. This dice determines attack, it determines accuracy, determines how well you do on skills, how well you do on saves, just about everything other than damage. Which brings me to my next dice, the D6. This is a 6-sided dice. Pretty standard. Used for damage. Next we have the D4. This one is also used for damage. It's a 4-sided dice. Next we have the D10. Again, used for damage. Next is the D12. This one is used for damage as well. 12-sided dice. And now we have the D8. The D8 is the one you will use the most, other than the D6 and the D20. It's an 8-sided dice. And finally, we have the percentile dice. This one, if you're a player, you don't really need to worry about this one. But if you're a GM, this one's important. You are going to combine this with the D10 and roll both of them at the same time. This is used whenever luck is a factor in your games. You'll roll both of these and it will give you a number between 1 and 100. You decide what happens based upon that number. And that's going to wrap up this video. If this video helped you, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Pathfinder 2 content. Also, make sure you hit that sub-notification bell to be alerted of new episodes. Next week, I will be covering 5 reasons why kids should play Pathfinder 2 and why parents should GM. So if you're a parent, be sure to check that out. And until next time, let's play some Pathfinder. 1, 2, 3, 4.